Nick Collier from DoubleStar here. Today we're going to talk about gas blocks and handguards. Why would you need to change your gas block? Well, that's the perfect reason. It's for your handguard. A lot of people are going to the longer handguards, or maybe you have the old A-frame sight and you want to get rid of that. So today that's what we're going to do. As you see, we've got the 7.5 inch with kind of the standard old school pistol upper look. And it's got a Picatinny rail gas block on it with a short handguard. What we're going to do is change that to where this upper will accept the cloak handguard. A little more modern, a little more cool. It's got the M-lock, and it's going to look better and it's going to perform better. So to change your gas block, the first step you're going to need to do is take your flash hider off. Once you get that done, it's time to get into the gas block. Now, most gas blocks are held on with Allen screws. So you just have to figure out which one you have, what size you have. Some of them are held on with pins. Your A-frame sights are held on with either straight pins or taper pins. Make sure you know what you're getting into when you do that. Straight pins, it's not hard to drive them out either way, but taper pins are a much bigger deal if you try to drive it out the wrong way because they're conical. So if you're smashing the big end, it's not going to get any smaller. But we're lucky. We've got the old gas block here with the set screws. So you just take your Allen wrench and you loosen up those four. Make sure you get them out far enough that you're not sitting in the grooves where it was sitting before. You got to clear that out. And it should, in theory, slide right off the end of the barrel. Like hopefully this one will do. There you go. So you can see you've got a little bit of wear, a little bit of gas buildup there on the upper. Now, one thing I want to tell you is you can reuse your gas tubes. As long as they're in good condition, you can clean them up and reuse them. This particular gas tube in this gas block is very difficult to remove. You're going to end up ruining your afternoon, breaking several 1/16 punches trying to drive this pin out once it gets carbon covered. So my recommendation for that is just buy a new gas tube. They're 10 or 15 bucks. Go ahead and replace the gas tube when you replace the gas block. What we're going to switch it to is this low profile gas block. But before we can do that, we got to get rid of this old handguard. So go ahead and secure that. Now I recommend you get either, if you've got a bench vise, get the action block, the AR action block for that, or something cool like this tool from Present Arms, clamps on. Now this old school handguard is pretty simple. It just unscrews from the barrel nut with a lot of threads. Thought I was kidding, didn't you? All right, so there it is, just your standard aluminum free float tube for a pistol. Now you're gonna also need an AR-15 armor's wrench. The reason you're gonna need this, especially if you're taking off this type of handguard, is you have to have these teeth to get into the holes of this barrel nut. So again, it is righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. You're gonna wanna just break that barrel nut loose, and then it should just come right off the threads. Depending on how used your gun is will depend on how easy that was to do. So now your barrel's off. If you wanted to, from this point, you could take the barrel completely out of the upper receiver, but we're not going to do that. Now, before you put your new one on, I recommend you use a little anti-seize. It just helps keep the threads to where that if someday you need to take your barrel nut off, you have that option. You don't have to fight with it quite as much. So the cloak handguard has a proprietary barrel nut, and that's what we're going to put on now. Make sure you got your threads on the right direction, and go ahead and tighten that down hand tight. Now the mil spec torque rating for a barrel nut is 35 to 80 foot-pounds of torque. If you have a torque wrench, great, go ahead and use it. If you're new to it, get that torque wrench. But for guys like me that have done this more than once, eventually you figure it out. So what I like to do is to let the threads from your steel barrel nut seat into the aluminum a little bit, so I tighten it and loosen it a couple times. And then I go ahead and give it to where it's snug, and it is not going to come off. Now, once you get your barrel nut on, then you can put your gas block in. But before we do that, we have to install the new gas tube. Now make sure again that you do this the right way. There's a hole in the bottom. You need to make sure that that's going towards the barrel. So you're just going to slide that in, and there's a pinhole that runs across the top with a tiny little pin that's always fun to install. I recommend you get a set of our armor's punches. Look at that. You got your starter punch ready to go. All you got to do, make sure everything's lined up with the gas tube. And with these little ones, they're kind of hard to hold on to sometimes. But you just give it a good solid shot, get it started, and then just tap it the rest of the way in. The right tools make the job so much easier. So, once you get that, loosen your screws out of there so you make sure you don't scuff up your barrel. Just get them enough clearance to get in there. You're going to slide that all the way to the back. Now, one thing you want to watch for is if you had a handguard cap on your barrel, you want to make sure you leave enough room that the hole in your gas block is going to cover the gas hole. The best way to do that is before you put your gas tube in, take the screw out of the bottom and flip it upside down. And you can see right where that's going to line up over the gas hole. This one's going to go right to the rear. Now the way you line this up, there's a couple ways you can do it. Brownell sells a jig that you can buy that will actually dimple the barrel for you, but I just eyeball it. You come in from the side, you can tell whether it's on top or if it's crooked, and sometimes they'll even kind of sit right in the middle. The one thing that you can do though is make sure that it's loose in the middle, and then look at the bottom. When you look in the upper receiver, you can see if that gas tube is centered in the upper receiver. So right inside there, if that's sitting crooked to one side or the other, then you're not centered. So go ahead and center that up. If you don't have your gas tube properly aligned, you're going to have problems. You're going to start loosening your gas key, you're going to have malfunctions, and it's going to be a nightmare. So make sure whenever you change something like this, you take it to the range and test it before you depend on it. Tighten those screws down good and snug. Make sure that the block didn't shift while you were tightening. Everything's centered up, and then go ahead and put him back on. So your new gas block is installed. You're ready to slide that handguard on. Pretty simple, just goes in, make sure you put it on the right side, slide it on. We've got a plate and 2 screws that sit in the grooves of that barrel nut. So you just want to make sure that you've got everything lined up where it's supposed to be. It sits right inside there. And you're going to tighten those screws down. The biggest thing you got to watch here is to make sure that when you're tightening everything up, that you don't go crooked. Make sure your rail lines up properly. It's got to be straight on the top. And what I mean is that all this is in a line because you've got a little bit of play. So you want to make sure that's centered. Tighten those screws down. The biggest mistake I've seen is people will put in a gas tube either upside down or they'll put it backwards in the gas block. So they'll run the screw or the pin in and the holes don't line up at all. It's pointing the wrong way. So they've got the whole thing on backwards. You do this enough, it'll happen to you. Ask me how I know. But anyway, once you get the screws tightened in, there you have the new handguard.